And we're online. Hi everyone, hope you've
Cool.
all had a great holiday season. With me today is Tom Thompson. Hi Tom, thanks for joining us.
Hey guys.
So I'm just going to say hello to everyone in the chat and then you can start by telling us a bit about yourself, okay?
Okay.
So, hi Charlene, hi Cross, Evolution of Gaming, good to see you. Reservoir Terrain, hi. Let's see, quite cool. Glad you could make it. And Earthman Brick, always nice to see you. And I know there's Dungeon Matron hiding around in the background there somewhere as well. So, Tom, how about you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, obviously the most important thing is I'm married to Dungeon Matron. That's really why I'm here. I am a historian. I guess that's the place to start. And ever since my grandfather gave me some historical novel when I was about 5, that's pretty much been my favorite activity.
Oh, so you
So
started
I
off
got a
pretty early, huh?
doctorate from the University of California, and which is, for those of you who don't know the system here, you essentially have a major field and a minor field usually.
Okay.
And my major field is American Revolutionary and Colonial, but my minor field is modern British history, although, of course, modern means anything from 1485 onward.
Close enough.
Um, it's modern compared to Roman Britain. And I specifically was interested in the late 19th century. Let's say the rise of industrialization and on into, let's say, until the second. In other words, I read an awful lot about Edwardian schoolboys, of which, of course, Tolkien was one.
Okay. And I think what you wanted to talk about today was how history influenced Tolkien or how we can see influence of history in Tolkien's work. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing that sort of discussed with various people over the years because, of course, everybody knows that Tolkien was an academic working at Oxford for his entire adult life. Um, and I think there's sort of a general perception that the lands of Middle Earth are essentially northwestern Europe. And he did leave sort of some clues as to exactly what he was thinking about as he depicted certain societies or certain activities. But it, because he wasn't a historian, it's a lot harder to get a hold of. And it is easy with some other authors to say, oh, that's based on this or it's reminiscent of this. But
And
with Tolkien, it's much, much, much harder.
in the sense that, for example, in J.R.R. Martin, you can say, this event is exactly this historical event, but with different people, kind of
Right.
thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Change the names to protect the innocent. And to go back farther, if you look at Robert E. Howard's Conan stories, every one of his every one of the countries on his map of the continent has a European analog.
Hmm.
So everybody who's in Zingara is Italian. Everybody in Aquilonia comes from Provence. It's very simple because he isn't developing the background. He's simply setting up a stage that his
Okay.
characters work on. So you don't get that with Tolkien. That is not what he is about. It's not what he's interested in doing. He's not creating a world so that his characters can do something. He's working backwards from his interest, which is language, not history per se. Although, of course, you can't separate the two.
Okay. One thing I'm not entirely clear about is that okay, I know that he had created the Elvish language just because he could, had some time on his hands, kind of thing, including the evolution of it and so on. But I also know that, for example, the Hobbit started off as a story for his children. If I remember correctly, he had to write it down because his eldest son was complaining that he was changing the details, so he had
Right,
to
right.
write it down to keep track of it.
Well, I mean, and if you actually look at The Hobbit, if you read The Hobbit, which was again originally never intended for publication,
Mhm.
it is extremely short on historical detail.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's which is one reason why other writers found it so easy to essentially copy uh, as soon as it became popular.
Okay.
Everything just kind of flows. It's a great story, but in terms of is this a country? What's our relationship? How far back do we go? Things like that. You don't find that in The Hobbit. The Hobbit is about Bilbo and the quest. So um, it kind of stands apart from a lot of the rest
Mhm.
of Tolkien's writing because it's really only later that he starts to like really try to fit everything together.
So, if I understand that correctly, he started to make the language. He built the evolution of the language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then he had to tell a bedtime story to his children, so he came up with the Hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had to build the world to flesh it out to write Lord of the Rings because his publisher wanted more Hobbit stories.
Yeah, I mean the way that he wrote that it is kind of nightmarish to keep track of, and that's why Christopher Tolkien took however many decades it was to put it together. But the first story that he wrote is written in 1916, and that's the Fall of Gondolin. And um, I mean, it's 1916. It's the middle of World War One. He writes this basically a war story that has page after page of descriptions of hand-to-hand combat. Um, so he's writing bits and pieces, and eventually feels the need, as his sort of language studies progress, to fit it all together. Okay? So it isn't so much that there has to be specific dates for things
Mhm.
as it is that this development must flow from a previous development.
Keeping a consistency in the narrative kind of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, so he's not big about doing a timeline,
Hmm. All
but
right.
everything has to be reasonable. Yeah.
And I mean,
Um,
he's also working off incredibly long time frame. So we're talking about progressions of millennia rather than a couple of 100 years.
yes. I mean, how long? The third age is slightly over 4,000. So, although, and again, this is not something he's interested in, so we never really get a glimpse into it. Why apparently is technology absolutely stagnant during that entire 4,000 years?
I was having a chat with that about that with some of the people on the Wheel Discord server.
Hmm.
Because again, that seems to be a common thing in fantasy novels. Even if you look at the Forgotten Realms in Dungeons and Dragons and so on, it's
Hmm.
like it never progresses forward. Uh, I suspect it's A because Tolkien didn't build it in, so didn't no one copied it. Sorry, or rather, they copied its substance.
Hmm.
But even if you look at it from an economic point of view, it doesn't always make sense unless you have massive populations. Take the Roman Empire or the or even ancient Egypt. They
You have to have the resources. That's really it. And if you look at the region of Eriador during the Fourth Age, during the Third Age, um, it's actually becoming depopulated.
it's becoming.
It's becoming depopulated because the northern realms of the Dunedain,
Mhm.
they're gone. They're just gone. There's remnants wandering in the wilderness.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, pretty much.
so yeah, so you don't have concentrations of population. I mean, it's clear that Gondor is declining in population. There are areas that have been abandoned.
Yeah,
So
and the thing is
it
that
is a
for
declining society.
yeah, and I mean for industrialization, apart from the materials you need a need for it.
Hmm.
So if you have a
Hmm.
declining population, you're probably producing. Sorry, if you're already producing enough to sort yourself out before that. and the
Mhm.
population is declining, you're probably sorted. You probably don't need to industrialize.
Right. Well,
And
it's
yeah,
I mean, just to get into a historical analogy right there, it's very much like Europe after the Black Death.
yeah,
You've over cultivated the land. You're now farming land that probably should not be cultivated. It should be wasteland. But now with the population decline, not only do you not need to farm that, you also don't need to farm a fairly significant proportion of the reasonable agricultural land.
yeah.
And because the Black Death keeps coming back about every 20 years,
It kind of keeps
you
the
have
population in check, kind of thing.
absolutely. It takes basically 200 years for the population to recover. So there's not, again, the what's left of the agricultural land that you're actually killing is fine for the declining population.
Hey, I think Mike finally made it. So,
Hello.
hey Mike, how are you doing?
Hey, Mike.
So let me just sort out the display here.
Sorry for the delay, guys.
Hey, no worries.
Quite all right.
So, sec.
My daughter did not want to get out of the bath and decided to have an almighty meltdown.
Sec.
So those crystals that I cast the other night on the Hangout came out.
Oh, nice. We'll have to talk about those later.
Don't show Dungeon Matron or she'll ask for them. There's a little bit of a thing for crystals.
Yeah, we kind of noticed.
Yeah. I don't. If you can see the display cabinet behind me here, like one whole side of that is nothing except rocks, basically.
So is that just a love of crystals, or because I know some people have some beliefs about energies and stuff with crystals and whatnot?
No, it's really just about rocks.
She just likes them.
Yes, she really does. I mean, we took a vacation to New Mexico once, and I think for all the other things that we did, the most exciting thing for her was that we went to White Sands, and she was able to get a piece of trinitite, which is the mineral that was produced by the explosion of an atomic bomb.
Ooh.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, it's a great thing to have in your house.
Yep.
Yeah, that sounds like the kind of thing that Lisa would go for.
Yes. So I've got salt crystals that are that long, and I'm like, can't we just cut it in half? It's just salt.
Okay,
bear with me, gents. I'm still trying to get you in frame.
Sure.
So are we live now?
Yep,
No.
we are live.
Oh, we're actually live.
We are.
Oh, so you started at 8:30.
Yeah. Yes, like I said,
Yep.
we'll get started and then you can jump in anytime you like.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I was sitting here thinking we still got some time, 20 minutes. Cool.
Okay,
All right, well,
okay, more or less
hello
sorted.
world. I didn't know you guys were watching, but thank goodness I didn't do anything stupid.
Luckily, you had your
Cool.
pants on and everything.
That's right. Well, we don't know that, do we?
Yeah, good point.
Cool. Right, cool. Well, glad to be here. And I was totally all week I've been intending to do I should brush up so that whenever I get to hang out on Sunday, I sound knowledgeable in some kind of a way. And I totally didn't get the opportunity to do that. So I'm probably here to learn more than anything.
Yeah, Scatter today
It's
said.
funny because we said the same thing basically. So that's it.
Well, let's just see where it takes us, and
Okay, Mike.
have a fun time talking about Lord of the Rings, Middle
Whatever
Earth.
comes up.
I'm representing anyway.
Yay! Yeah,
My new favorite top.
Scatter Terrain said the world knows about the bot now.
Sorry?
I said Scatter Terrain said the world knows about the bot now. Okay, so we actually started talking about a bit about the background of how Lord of the Rings got written and how he started writing it from the perspective of a linguist rather than a historian or
Yep.
a novelist. And yeah, we had actually gotten talking about the economics of it, like industrialization. Say, for example, hey, the fourth age, the third age, sorry, was about 4,000 years long or whatever, but technology never seems to go forward.
Yep.
So that's where you came in, I guess.
Okay, cool. Cool. I mean, I don't know if I have anything to add. I mean, like, the whole thing with Saruman coming in and industrialization. I guess it was Tolkien. I think I read a. I'm not sure if it was like direct quotes from Tolkien or someone referencing Tolkien, where he was talking about how he was noticing his cities and stuff growing and getting bigger, more industrialized. And this is something that he found personally really, really kind of um, distressing.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
And so obviously, like, that's the whole thing with Saruman being the evil kind of factor in especially in the Two Towers, is he's basically the driving force behind industrialization
Yeah,
in Middle Earth.
and that was one thing I was going to mention because of any of the factions in Lord of the Rings, especially, he's the one faction that has almost infinite free labor.
Mhm.
So,
Exactly.
so thinking about it, that would have been the last person who needed industrialization.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again,
I-
thinking back to the Roman Empire, for example, or again ancient Egypt, you've got either a massive supply of slaves, or you've got the farmers during the flooding of the Nile Delta, who have
Mhm.
nothing to do because the fields are flooded. They're not going to work the flooded fields. So that there's
Mhm.
almost infinite supply of manual labor, which means that they had no incentive to develop it further beyond what they needed to build stuff and so on.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you notice, and this comes through, like I like the Lord of the Rings films. I can nitpick all I want because anybody can, and anytime that anything is adapted from the word to the screen, it just everybody needs to let things go, you know.
Yeah.
But
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, but there are a couple of things I think in this situation that Peter Jackson did that I think bring out some things that I'm assuming he realized it, that are different. Um, let's say different between what Saruman does and what Sauron does.
Uh-huh.
And mostly what I'm thinking about is if you look at the uh, because there's statements in the Lord of the Rings that Sauron had turned the plain of Gorgoroth into a giant forge,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you think, oh, this is very reminiscent of what's going on under the Tower of Orthanc,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's a parallel there. But the difference lies in the results of that, in the sense that if you look again visually at the armies of Mordor as they're coming out through the Black Gate,
Mm-hmm.
they are variegated. They are not, nobody's wearing the same armor.
Mm-hmm.
The swords don't follow any particular pattern. Okay. So they may be the result of a giant forge, but it's not an industrial forge.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
I
not
think I
like.
see what you mean.
Yeah, I see what you're
Yeah.
saying.
And now go to the creation shots in under Orthanc, and you're literally watching assembly line. How to create an Urukai. You pull him out of the pit. You put the hand on him. You hand him a weapon from a pile of weapons, right?
Mm-hmm.
A group of weapons. You give him armor and you send him out. And who do you serve? Saruman, and then they're all standing there and they're chanting in unison. That's an industrial place. What's going on in Mordor, Plain of Gorgoroth, as a forge or not is not industrial. It's pre-industrial.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's like going to Colebrookdale in the 1780s. There's forges everywhere,
yeah,
but there's no standardization.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I like that. I mean, with Sauron, I think maybe more like in my head, the way it is with Sauron, he's basically attracting all of the groups to him, if you know what I mean. He's like this kind of figurehead where they come to him, whereas Saruman doesn't have that drawing power, so he has to create it himself.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. But
Yeah, he comes up with a pattern because he can start with the pattern.
Yeah.
going back to your comparison, so saying like Saruman is running a production line. Sauron is running a pre-industrial complex. What are the implications of that?
I think for one thing, you know, and again, I think this is borne out. Sauron has to put up with a certain amount of infighting, competition, whereas Saruman can simply say, "Go here, do this," and it will happen.
Okay.
So it's sort of the difference between having a massive conscript army and having a small professional army. It's the difference between having the BEF,
Okay.
you know, and let's say the French army in 1870 or something like that, where everybody just shows up and nobody knows what they're actually supposed to do. So you've got a lot of people, but you don't know what you're doing.
But here's an interesting question then. So you have Saruman's creations to a certain degree. They're his creations, or whatever his production line, that are subservient to him. So let's say Saruman somehow is taken out of the picture early. Do you think that they would then become subservient to Sauron? Or the other question is, say, because you do know that Saruman, like, I think that he was acting subservient to Saruman, but what actually in the back of his mind was going, like, he's finding his own path to grasping his own power at some point, possibly. Like, say Saruman turned on Sauron, would his army be subservient to him still in that point? So it's like, am I making any sense there?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just unfortunate that their names are so similar.
Yeah, true story.
I know. I keep on pausing because I'm making sure that I'm saying the right
word.
It's like
you can't deal with the main concept until you go back and go, did I say that correct?
Yeah, exactly. That used to do my head in when I was 11, when I read it the first time.
You know, it's an interesting thing because I mean, Saruman sees himself as a competitor.
Yeah.
With Sauron.
Yep.
So yeah, and he is led into doing what he's doing by Sauron. He's not ordered to do it. So it isn't like, oh, we've taken somebody out of the chain of command, but the link, we just need to reforge that link. The line is there. I don't think so. They're two very different organizations. They aren't geographically contiguous. You know, it's sort of like the only way I could see it happening is if Sauron sent, you know, the Witch King of Angmar there to take control of the situation personally, something like that. You know, even then, I'm not sure. You know, because they're two completely different organizations that work in very, very different ways.
Okay, we have a question. Is there a reason why the names are so similar? Did Tolkien explain?
I've got a little theory about that. And it could be like, this is literally made up in my own head. I've not heard anyone say this, but I've always wondered about it. And it's the sounds, the word, the sound, the name of it, starting with an S and ending with an N. And the fact that Tolkien had quite a heavy Catholic influence, I was wondering if it's possible that the evil name being an S and an N is somewhat similar to Satan, and could possibly have been like his association with the evil is the sound of it, just phonic. There's something similarly evil sounding to Satan
It's
with
it's
Sauron or Saruman.
It's possible, but it's not like him to be that heavy-handed usually.
Possibly not.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just something I wonder
I
about.
could see C.S. Lewis doing that, but not Tolkien.
I mean, I guess my thought is, if you were right, I think that because Tolkien was so sensitive to language, that it would have to have somehow been a completely subconscious thing.
Yeah, but that's why I'm actually not. I'm saying on a subconscious level, because I mean, to me, both names sound sinister.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Saruman
again, in this, back to your Catholic point, in the Christian tradition, where the serpent is a figure of evil, whereas he wasn't in the classical world.
Mm-hmm.
That the hissing certainly is reminiscent of that, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I would say that the argument against your theory is that Tolkien spent a fair amount of time coming up with an actual etymology for the name Saruman. You know, the whole shark thing. But you know, look, as we know, human brains can contain a lot of contradictory stuff. So it's quite possible that at the back of his mind, again, as a Catholic Edwardian schoolboy at St. Edward's Hall, it got in there, and it came out later. And there's just certain things you'll never know, but that's what's fun to speculate.
Exactly. It is pure speculation, and you know, I mean, there's bound to have been somebody's written about that specifically. Actually,
I can guarantee that there has been some writing about it.
Yeah.
But
I just think it's unfortunate because we end up in situations like this where it's like, wait, whose name did I just say?
Saruman.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Cross is saying, where did I don't think that's right because Silmarillion also sounds similar. Yes, but again, going back to Sauron and Saruman, there are only so many sounds a human can produce, so
yeah,
it's
and Silmarillion has a different, like Saruman and Sauron. The first syllable is essentially the same, right? So you're not getting that with Silmarillion.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting a much longer, more lyrical name, so it's less likely to come from that. But again, you don't know. You know, I personally, when I hear Silmarillion, I always think of the band Brilliant. So, yeah.
Are there other that's scattered terrain? Are there other Catholicism influences that I've noticed or that we've noticed? I mean, now that I'm on the spot, not specifically, but over like the years, I have noticed. I mean, speaking on the Silmarillion, that certainly draws a hell of a lot of parallels to some biblical descriptions of. So basically, you have a creator that creates music and sings a song, and then this opposing being starts to sing their own tune.
It's not even an opposing being, Mike. Remember, it's one of the notes in the music starts to get its own ideas.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Well, but it's Melkor, right? Specifically starts to sing a different song or different, and like the other hosts kind of start to listen to Melkor's tune, etc., etc. This exact parallel happens in the biblical scripture of
The Fall of Lucifer and
Yeah,
that stuff.
Lucifer.
Pretty
The
much,
Fall of
pretty much
Lucifer.
same thing.
That's exactly.
Yeah, this isn't
what-
this part isn't even just Catholic, right? I mean, this is Christianity.
Yeah, yeah.
It is an interesting thing. There's, you kind of want to get beyond the surface, and I don't know how much we'd ever be able to. But the whole thing about evil resides in the East. There's really easy comparisons, I suppose, but I'm not sure, because there isn't any structured religion per se in Tolkien. There's cosmology, but there's not religion.
I don't think directly, specifically religion within it, but it's just influence, if you know what I mean. Like a moment ago, Karl mentioned C.S. Lewis, who really was, in his writings, drawing very, very Christian parallels in his writing.
It wasn't so much a parallel. It's like, the lion is Jesus. The lion is Jesus.
Yeah,
exactly.
Drawing parallels is one way to put it. Pounding you over the head with it.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was very loud and clear. But Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were very close friends. As I know that they were quite they were close friends, but I'm sure it wasn't always friendly or whatever. Yeah. But
they also argued a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. They had a lot of disagreements for sure. So just that very nature that you've got another writer, another scholar who you're constantly, iron sharpens iron. So that influence is coming in there. So the influence is definitely there. But then again, there's other things that I think Tolkien's classic for saying that his writings aren't allegorical. But then again, he went off to the trenches and he fought in war, and you can't say that was not influencing him. And then it's just the industrialization and the massive push to creating armor and all of these things. The parallels that's drawn to
the thing is that Mike, remember,
rise of Hitler and stuff.
That quote about allegory is often taken out of the full context.
Okay.
So what he went on to say is that allegory is when the author tells you what to think.
It's telling you what to think. Yeah.
It's not about making something up completely. So he could still be writing from experience.
Right. Or it's more of a code than anything else.
Exactly. So he's not telling you. Again, going back to C.S. Lewis, beating you over the head with the fact that the lion is Jesus. That's an allegory.
Yeah.
Okay. But on the other hand, if the way that Tolkien preferred to write was that he prefers to set a scene, and then you figure out what you want to think about it. It's not his business to tell you what to think.
Okay, so just to draw a little, it's not that I disagree, but just to throw the devil's advocate kind of thing, sort of cat amongst pigeons. Another possible parallel with Tolkien to some scriptural references could be the death and resurrection of Gandalf.
Yes, definitely.
Do you see what I'm saying? There's the idea of a death, and that's similar to C.S. Lewis with Aslan, the death and resurrection of Aslan. But so this, I'm just wondering if those two guys were sitting chatting about this is just as an interesting concept for a start.
I can see them sitting and talking about it over a beer and taking a bet on who's going to write it better.
Yeah, and I think one thing to remember is that you're right. I mean, the inkwells met, they talked to each other, they critiqued each other's writing and all of this. But when you have, I don't know, Tolkien and Lewis and Christopher Isherwood and people like that, and they're all sitting there, they're also at the same time all creatures of a particular educational system.
Yeah,
so
that's true. Yeah.
The idea of the resurrection, you're absolutely right. Oh, it's like Aslan being, bound on the table. I mean, this is about as explicit an altar, in the Abrahamic tradition as it's possible to have. Okay. But at the same time, it's not like other cultures, including the ones that Tolkien was most interested in, the Germanic and Finnish ones,
That's
they
true.
also have their, tradition of sacrifice and rebirth.
That's true. Yeah, yeah.
So it's hardly ever one cause.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, you've actually just mentioned like something that I think is the biggest influence in Tolkien's writing is that whole Germanic and kind of also Norse histories and stuff. I know that he was a massive fan of Beowulf.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, look at the Rohirrim, or the way the Rohirrim is written as well. Like, it's all very much based around that kind of stuff.
Yeah, if I'm not
And in fact,
mistaken,
the word Meduseld,
uh-huh.
the King Theoden's Hall, actually appears in Beowulf.
It's not just that. It's also the names of the dwarves in The Hobbit, for example, are taken right out of the Poetic Edda.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I
I didn't
think,
know that.
yeah, it's literally in the first poem, I believe. And if I'm not mistaken, yes, he had also stated that his intention was to create a kind of mythology for the British Isles.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
100%.
And I think that's, again, we're back to the whole question of, okay, he's not writing a history. We're trying to find the history in his stuff, but he's not writing a history. He's writing a mythology, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, like, I don't know if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but like the way Tolkien is viewing Middle Earth is that the British Isles is Middle Earth. Ultimately, we are in Middle Earth now. That was the history of where we're at. That's the way I've always kind of, in my mind, thought about it.
I think
Kind of, yeah.
I think there's a danger in drawing too close of an analogy, because I think of Middle Earth not as the British Isles. I think of it in the Norse sense, as Midgard.
Okay, yeah.
This is one of the worlds that exists.
Yeah.
And you said earlier the whole sort of Germanic, and I would say Proto-Germanic, so that we can cover all the Scandinavians too. Just the fact that there are both dark elves and light elves, that is straight out of Germanic myth, and specifically Scandinavian myth. So it almost comes down to, well, is this German or is this Scandinavian? Well, you can't really tell the difference. How much difference is there between a Gandalf who looks like Woden or a Gandalf who looks like Odin?
Yeah.
You're never going to tease that one.
But it's actually, so you mentioned that the different levels there. I can't remember your exact terminology, and I did notice earlier in the chat, Elston made a little joke, but it's kind of based on those lines where he said, if Middle Earth has hobbits, then what does Lower and Higher Earth have? So like, it's a joke, but like that's kind of that sort of thing, like that you're saying there with the.
Well, yeah, I mean the whole Midgard idea is, okay, you can go from Midgard to, I don't know, Svartheim, which is where the Dark Elves.
But that's kind of like the Undying Lands, then, effectively.
Well, it's that kind of structure, and there are clues to that. I think if you look at, as an example, Durin's Bridge in Moria with the Balrog, if that is, I think it's pretty clear that that's basically Bifrost. That's how you get to Asgard.
Okay, so hold on there a second, because there's also, I believe it's at the end of the Second Age. It's basically when Numenor sinks, and because the what's his name got sick of. Look, I told you not to sail west, so basically flooded half the world, broke it, and
what is it? I can't remember. Who's the main angel, basically? He calls upon the Iluvatar. He calls upon Eru. He puts down his baton, which is his sign of office, and calls upon, I think, Iluvatar to sink.
I find the Silmarillion stuff so confusing.
And I think that's the point, is it's not clear. You have no idea.
It's written in a very scriptural way, so I'll be honest, it's a lot easier to listen to than to read.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, remember, he was a philologist who dealt in languages that were not written down very well. Those are
Also true, yeah.
You know, the Poetic Edda was written down in what, the 13th and 14th century, but that's not when they were created. They're
Oh yeah, of course. Same with Beowulf. It's literally the same thing.
Exactly. So,
Numenor
so yeah, he
is Atlantis. So Dungeon Matron is
it's
saying,
Atlantis. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. That's the general idea that I always got from it.
That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, and to that, and sort of, I mean, it's sort of interesting that again you have the fact that there were Numenorians who survived and returned to Middle Earth, and they already had colonies there, but you know they helped bring Gondor to its height and all of that, and I honestly don't remember. It's been a long time since I read my Plato, but you know there is this sort of general thought that after Atlantis sank, refugee Atlanteans went places. You know, this is basically an idea that's come up since the 70s, I think. But
yeah, but I think there's plenty of science fiction based on that.
Yes, exactly.
Isn't one of the theories that they moved on to Egypt?
They moved on to Egypt and they went on to Central America. Unfortunately, the evidence for that is that people built pyramids in both places, whereas if you've ever played in a sandbox with 2-year-olds, you know that the first thing you build is a pyramid. So,
well, we could get dragged into like the whole pyramids thing, but like I've always thought, like there's only a certain number of shapes.
Exactly, yeah.
And I mean, it's you know, a reasonably clever shape to build for a structure that's going to last. So the fact that like you have them in the different places around the world.
Yeah. How are we going to stack these stones so they don't fall on our heads?
Exactly. It's right. Kind of common sense, really. Then again, maybe it was aliens.
Yeah, that's true too.
Possibly.
Well, it could have been both.
Could be.
You know, the aliens came and said, "Oh, the Atlanteans, they're the most advanced people on this planet. You know, they're the people that we want doing this work for us." Mm-hmm. But again, that just comes back to it's not always one cause. Sometimes it's multiple causes. So if Tolkien is looking at something and going, "Oh, I'm writing this down," in his head, and this gets back to the whole question of, you know, plagiarism suits. You know, somebody goes, "Well, I've never read that." Well, maybe you haven't, but maybe you overheard a conversation on a bus about it. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, this is a guy who spent his life reading every fragment of Proto-Germanic literature that he could get his hands on. Not that there's a huge amount, but so, you know, who knows what's messing around in there, and eventually it shows up. You know, he's not trying to plagiarize it. He's not doing anything with it other than, you know, what his particular muse is telling him to do. And again, he's always filtering it through the lens of language.
Yeah, so like the whole language thing, that I find that very interesting, and I'm terrible at languages, to be honest. To say that he created a language from scratch is probably a bit of a stretch, though, right? Would you say, or would you say that like it is? Sorry,
biscuit.
Yeah, my cat wants in on the conversation. Yeah, well, what's your opinion on how he went about writing his Elvish language, and what was influencing the Elvish language?
Well, I think aren't the different languages based is such a bad word. Reminiscent of different languages that he was an expert in.
See, this is what I'm trying to say is that like to say that he just, so I mean, someone did just create Klingon, for instance.
If I remember correctly, again, this is from what I remember, so might be off a bit. But if I remember correctly, what he did wasn't create the language; he reverse engineered Saxon, I believe.
Well, I think
so. The idea was that okay, this is the language that was present at whatever. Now, if we had to take this back through 3,000 years, what would it have sounded like? And then you get
and
branching
again,
and
that's
stuff
the
like that.
key. Yeah, that's the key, is that he's not saying I need a language to make this more believable. He's saying this is where the language is.
Yeah.
If I'm going back into the distant past, what would be I don't want to say believable, what would be a
Plausible.
reasonable way
Yeah.
that the language would have been? And that's what professional philologists do. Nobody knows what Proto-Indo-European really sounded like. It's a tool, basically. So
what I'm curious about as well is, so he created the whole Elvish language, and then you've got Dwarven runes and stuff, but you're not really hearing the Dwarvish language so much within the text, which I find, I mean, maybe he's just like, I can't be bothered to create two languages.
I think he copped out of that one.
Yeah, I mean, see, you might say that, and I might say that, and Karl might say that, but Tolkien would probably say, hot damn, I get to create another language.
Maybe he would have done, had he lived another 10 years.
I've got a free afternoon. I'll create a new language.
Exactly. So maybe he would have gotten there. Like, I mean, I imagine, because I mean, like, basically he died with works unfinished.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And which means that he clearly intended to keep creating.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is some Dwarven in the Lords of the Ring, but
very little
of the Rings. But frankly, I don't remember a single word in it other than the name of the language, which is Uzdul.
I think that there are a few insults,
probably,
possibly, but if I remember correctly, he had written like they do not share this language with outsiders.
Yeah, no, I remember dwarves are secretive. Yeah, they hold on to things, so it kind of fit. But I think if you remember, the Red Book of Westmarch is supposed to be written in whatever the language is. In D&D terms, it's just common. But yeah, that seems to have been Saxon. And of course, he was perfectly conversant in Saxon. He read Saxon, not Saxon, but he read Old English as a teenager. So, a little bit of light reading, sure. The one that has always fascinated me is Sindarin and Quenya, because Quenya is essentially, they both started in the same place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the elves went across the sea for however many millennia. The language changed, and when some of them, led by Feanor, came back, they were speaking a language that was different from the elves that had remained. So the elves that remained, I believe, were speaking Sindarin, and the elves that had gone away and come back were speaking Quenya, and they were clearly related. But he had to sit down and figure out how that relationship worked, and that's much harder than just deconstructing Anglo-Saxon.
Would that been because of that? Would have been possibly because of the influence of Man or Numenorians or whatever?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember it that clearly, but the idea that somebody, it's like, look, in 100 years, is anybody going to be able to understand Australians? I don't know.
I can't understand them now.
Yeah, I know. I teed that one up for you.
I'm only joking. If there's any Australians, love you guys. My sister-in-law is Australian. All my nephews and nieces are half Australian, so I love you all. It's all cool.
But the distance, the time, the divergence from it's the same as English now is not the same as German. But
yeah, for sure.
1,000 years ago, Anglo-Saxons and Germans, I realize that's kind of overlap. They could, they were mutually intelligible, and they were also mutually intelligible with the Norse. So
yeah, I'm thinking about how, because the point you just raised just made me think it's how language building would also have affected world building. Because, for example, again, the guys who stayed behind didn't need words for ships. They didn't build any ships. They had no concept for it. So you can start to see why, okay, they would have started developing different words because they have different requirements now. different concepts and probably eventually different idioms and different what do you call it expressions. So yeah, I can
Mhm.
see that happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, let's go back to Tolkien. Tolkien's probably doing this not because he's like, well, I think the story is going to be this. He's saying, hey, I wonder what would happen if there was a root language, but a group broke off, but then came back later. You know, that's the way a philologist thinks. He doesn't think, oh, they're 3,000 miles and 3,000 years away. He's not thinking geographically, except within the concept of the development of the language.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So it drives the story, right? If Tolkien woke up one morning and said, hey, I'd really like to work on that, then he goes, oh, that means I'm going to have to splinter off a group. Oh, that means I'm going to change the story.
Oh, I have to make a different language now. Yes. Oh, hi, Sean. Sean has a good point here. One thing you also have to look at is Tolkien's exposure during World War One. When you look at that time, how many cultures were in the British Army? Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's interesting that as far as I can remember, the only time that he ever specified that a place in Middle Earth was a place in Europe was, he said, the Dead Marshes and the Dagorlad came directly out of the Somme.
All right.
Okay, which, you know, it's a very, you know, anybody who knows their British history knows how seminal the Battle of the Somme is to the national consciousness. Okay, so it makes sense. He was there. You know, he was a lieutenant in charge of the company at that point. But I think that's the only time that he did feel that that source was so strong that he could say that is directly from.
Okay.
Which, you know, that's a hell of a thing to remember, right?
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, I can imagine that would be very difficult to get out of one's head.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some evidence that he had PTSD. I mean, he did have trouble sleeping and stuff.
I mean, I think not only with stuff with the languages and stuff, I think that's bound to have influenced like the theme of camaraderie with and brotherhood in war. That's very clear with the Fellowship, like and even when the Fellowship gets disbanded, whatever little group is together, it's like we're in this together, we're going to fight through, and we're going to get through it together. That was kind of very much present in trenches on both sides of these conflicts.
And I think it's interesting because, like, if you look at Boromir's death, there's the idea that within the squad mentality, within the buddy mentality, there is room for redemption.
Yep, I like that as well.
But there's also, and if you were watching, you know, the Two Towers and watching Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas run endlessly through that movie, be like, wait a minute, there's a trap here as well. It's the thought that as long as you're part of a unit, it'll be okay. But that's not true.
Well, no, I mean they had the group had to disband to actually be successful in the ultimate mission.
Well, I don't know that we want to argue this, but why? Why? What don't you think that it would have been easier? I mean, they talk about how Tolkien talks about how, or sorry, not Tolkien. Somebody in the company, somebody in the Fellowship says, "Oh, it'll be much easier for Frodo to get to Mordor with just Sam, you know, rather than having other people help him." I'm like, why don't you want other people helping him?
Well, I wonder.
Because he has no idea where he's going other than this sort of vaguely, I'm going east.
Yeah,
and if the land gets crappier and crappier, it's a sign that I'm on the right track.
yeah, but certainly to a certain degree, but there's also the added factor of stealth for a start.
I mean, dude, it's like 9 guys. It's not a platoon with
It's
musicians
down to
and
8 by then.
stuff. Say again?
It's down to 8 by
Ah,
then.
eight at this point, yeah.
Yeah, but you got to remember that 4 of them are hardened, like with
Yeah.
even they're hardened warriors as well. So if they're going into a land where they're going to potentially encounter, like, their inclination is to fight,
Not really. I
and
mean,
fights draw massive amounts of attention.
not really, because I
Whereas
mean,
a
like,
hobbit-
look, Aragorn is basically a ranger.
Yeah.
Say it again?
Look, I would want Aragorn helping me get to Mordor.
Yeah,
I don't care about Gimli. I don't care about Legolas. I want Aragorn on my side, getting me there.
I mean,
yeah.
3/4 of his job was being invisible practically.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Look, but again, we're getting back to the whole point of, look, most writers have holes in them.
But I don't think there's a hole there. Like, I honestly think that it becomes quite clear at that point when at Boromir's death, it becomes clear to Frodo the sheer power of the ring and the corruptibility of the people around it. That at that point, you like, if you're under that amount of pressure and you've just encountered a huge man who's trying to take this thing off you, you're kind of going like, well, who do I trust then? Can I really trust these people? Do I really want Aragorn to come along with me? I don't know if I can, because I think it's quite like the wise choice to make, knowing that corruptibility was there.
I see your point. I would say I don't think it is the wise choice, but it is a perfectly understandable.
same to us here.
Yeah. Because the funny thing about this, and this is something that's made clear at the meeting of the council in Rivendell, is that ultimately nothing matters other than destroying the ring.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can win all the battles and still lose the war. Right? So what is the point of raising Rohan? What is the point of going to Minas Tirith and trying to convince this addled, old man, oh no, you need to do something. What's he going to do? Can he help you get into Mordor? Well, no. So,
well, he was quite a powerful Ishtari, or not Ishtari. A quite powerful wizard.
Yeah, same thing.
Saruman.
Oh no, I'm talking about going to Minas Tirith and talking to the steward, to Denethor.
Oh right, sorry. Yeah. I thought I had my brain went to Isengard there for some reason.
Yeah, and Isengard is really, if you think about it, Isengard is really, like, if you took Isengard out, would you lose anything? What would you lose?
The whole industrialization thing,
which suggests that it's kind of important to him.
Exactly,
because it's not necessary in the plot at all.
On the other hand,
it's interesting.
Once they break off, okay, let's say that it was not the optimal thing to do. I don't think it was the optimal thing to do, but that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So the options for the people who were left over were either try to follow them in, which would have been a different mess, go back home, that's really an option, or do what they did, which was basically create the biggest, loudest diversion they could do. So we've got causing trouble at Isengard, raising Rohan, and all that kind of loud noises and battles they did. Like, look over here.
And I guess it's presented at a strategic level as, okay, see, it worked. The eye isn't looking. I guess here's the problem, and this is a D&D problem.
Mm-hmm.
Sauron is a thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of year old being. This is not his first dance. He knows. Look, if the Council of Elrond knows, Sauron knows that it's all about the ring. Why does he give a crap about Minas Tirith? He knows how big his. I mean, if the ring is in his power, look, take those million orcs that march out of the Black Gate and put them all around. The what is it? I can't remember the name of it. The mountains of Ag, right? Just that's what you need to do is logger up. You don't need to send all your guys off down to the Pelennor Fields. You need to get the ring. And he, of all people, should know that.
Yeah, but I mean, surely there's battle strategy to that, in that just in terms of sheer distance and covering your bases. Like, say, Minas Tirith, or not Minas Tirith, say Helm's Deep is a successful destruction of Helm's Deep, and you wipe out Rohirrim. You don't have aid coming from behind. That's quite a clever battle tactic. And why send armies walking over to the other side around Minas Tirith, which is another clear strategical point on the map, when you can keep that army facing Minas Tirith, and through the power of mobile telephones or Palantir, you can seduce somebody into doing it for you. I mean, that happens in war all the time. Like, you have, like, in the history of the world, like leaders who kind of convinced other leaders in other countries to join in the conflict from another position, to strengthen their own position, even though they're not necessarily really allies.
Right. Well, case in point, the Italians declaring war on France in 1940 after the hard stuff was done.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, and it may work and it may not. But I think my point is that, and this goes back to something that Karl and I were talking about before you came on, which is Gondor is not a threat to anybody. Gondor is a declining society. It is depopulated. Look at the ruins of Osgiliath if you want to see that.
Yep.
You don't need to take it. It's just withering on the street.
And just to add on to that, it's like you said, Sauron is like a few thousand years old. If there's anything he's good at, it's waiting.
But I guess the attacking it is not based upon it being a threat per se, but based upon the desire for the pure destruction of man, and an easy target to wipe out and stamp out is just like right there.
I think you're right. Basically what I would argue is that Sauron has a prioritization problem.
Okay.
What?
But the thing is, ultimately he fails. Ultimately his battle tactics fail, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Absolutely. But let's put it this way. Let's say that instead of marching all of these guys out to the Pelennor Fields, he had successfully managed to seal off Mordor and grab the ring. Now he walks, probably flies, right, down to the Pelennor Fields and stands there in front and just shows them the ring and does whatever he does, right? And they all just swear to be his slaves for him. He doesn't have to do anything fancy, and it's much more personal, which is, you would think to someone like him, the idea of these Numenorians bowing to him, that would be great, right? Sauron's got an ego. So I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from, is like, look, it's fine if you want to take Minas Tirith. I'm not sure why you had to do it now. It's gonna fall.
All right, well, here's the question then. If you were Sauron, what would you have done?
I would have sent pretty much that entire orcish army out to look for for Frodo. I mean, he's one hobbit. He has no idea where he is. Look, if he doesn't find Gollum, but it's if he doesn't capture Gollum, he has no idea how to get in anywhere. This is, by the way, and I don't know how good Tolkien was at high strategy, but dude was a company commander in one of the largest wars in history. I'm pretty sure he doesn't make the mistake of not providing a map or preliminary intelligence or something like that. You know, Sam and Frodo are wandering and lost. They have no idea where they are or where they're going.
So they have no idea where they are and where they're going, but that also would suggest that Sauron has no idea where they're going. So you've got this massive army that you're going to send out wandering in the middle of nowhere, and they don't know what.
Well, I'm just suggesting that if they're orcs from Mordor, they probably have a better chance of knowing what the dead marshes are like.
Yeah, and I mean, if you've got enough people, you just throw them out there, and they're bound to run into them.
You just link arms and you field walk, basically.
I was about to suggest that you just set them all up in a big line across
That's
Middle
right.
Earth.
because if you're Sauron, you don't care if they drown in the dead marshes. Why do you care? You know, if they fall off a cliff outside of the Black Gate, you don't care. But what you're trying to do is set up that cordon.
But I also think that maybe the slight flaw in this idea is that the one thing that Sauron was not expecting was that they would desire to destroy the ring. So he would end up looking in the entirely wrong place, because based on that very thing, it's not coming here. They're going to try and keep it as far away from me as possible.
And do what Boromir wants to do, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, of all the things that he can't conceive of, it's the destruction of the ring. Exactly. And I think that comes from two things. And one is, it is a weapon, and the nature of weapons is to be used. That's Boromir's position, right? So we know that's a viable position no matter which side of this, right? And then the second thing is, don't forget, the way that Tolkien talks about the ring, it's not just a weapon. It contains large parts of Sauron. Yep. So the mere concept of its destruction, in a sense, is beyond him. Why would somebody do it? And that quickly translates into, you can't do that.
Okay, there's also a strong element of okay, this thing gives you great power. Why would you destroy it?
Yeah. I mean, it's of great worth, no matter how you value things. Why would you do that? Why would you throw it into a volcano? You know?
I'm just reading Steve's comment, like, that is top drawer trolling right there. Lord of the Rings is dull. Needed more aliens, time travel, and better cast, e.g. Gary Busey, Gilbert.
Rod Schneider and Lenny Henry.
Well, you know, I love the Lord of the Rings, but you know, it's written by a philologist, not a novelist. I did get bored as people, you know, traveled endlessly and then commented on how they were traveling endlessly.
So the thing is, like, see, the things that you experience as possible holes in the plot and whatnot, to me, I guess, kind of add a little bit of realism to it, because yes, there would have been better battle tactics. Yes, there could have been perfect battle tactics from both sides. Basically, both sides in the whole thing, they messed up their battle tactics and did stuff that didn't make sense.
Which is a perfectly realistic thing to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
No, you're absolutely right. People make mistakes.
That's the thing, is it like that to me makes it more believable and real, and actually ultimately better writing, because you have you mentioned the Battle of the Somme, which is an absolute disaster.
Mm-hmm.
It was an absolute disaster for the Allied forces back then, and just a horrible tactics that they put in, and the amount of just sheer destruction of men. And So that just says to me that the way Tolkien has written it is actually kind of spot on. Like the absolute failure of command from even the most apparently wisest of commanders.
No, I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. And the phrase that we use here is armchair quarterback.
Yeah. I think that it's really interesting to go like, well, what would I have done differently? And I think this is where we have to bring in the highest thing, which is just send the Eagles.
Yeah, yes, okay, fair enough. Fair enough. See, I'm gonna point out another parallel in another fantasy setting, which is why didn't somebody just hire a sniper to take out Voldemort?
Yeah.
You know, it's okay, fine, and we all know, again, similar to the Lord of the Rings, where we were talking before about why is there no technological improvement, declining population, and all of that. You know, obviously the wizarding population doesn't work the way it's portrayed, right? So you're right. I mean, these are stories. You have to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think the in a sense the key to why they are engaging, despite all of these holes we can talk about. I mean, by the way, it's great that they have holes because then we can talk about it.
Yeah.
The thing that makes it, I hate to say timeless, but in a world we're many decades beyond their publication now, and it's still a worldwide cultural phenomenon, is that behind all of it is not just the language, but the fact that language is something that we all do every day.
Yep.
And that's what Tolkien, I don't know he thought about it. I mean, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But as a linguist, language is A, one of the things that sets us apart from men. B, gives us a sense of the past. And C, allows us to communicate ideas with others. So because this world is not based, and those of you who've DM'd will know this, did you draw a map first? You know, it's not about drawing a map. Although, again, as I think I said to Karl in the warm-up, if you look at a map of Middle Earth, there's no national boundaries.
Aha. Do you know what? My friend Richard this week, he's clearing out his bookshelf, and he sent me 2 little books this week. I haven't read this before. Tree and Leaf, including a poem, the Mythopoeia. I can't pronounce it properly. Tolkien book, but he also sent me The Journeys of Frodo, which, so I literally just got this the other day, is full of topographical and whatnot maps of the whole entire journey of the Fellowship, right from the Shire all the way through to Mordor, and it has got all of that,
like borders and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, but this is by someone who's kind of gone and
not
Tolkien. And I guess that's the key. It's like, look, the Rhine is a natural border, right?
Yeah.
And if you're standing on one side of the Rhine, you could be in France, or you could be in Germany. But that doesn't mean that just because, the river Anduin is a river and a natural boundary, that this realm builds up to that point and stops, and on the other side of the river, the same thing happens. So it's as a historian, this is one of my pet peeves. Is like, I love all these things that say this is the extent of the Carolingian Empire in 850, and it's like, you have no idea where that was, because it's fluid. It's fluid until very, 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 very late. So, it's we all look for certainty. We all build that map before we start our D&D campaign. but Tolkien's not doing that because linguistic maps. Go back and take a look at a linguistic map of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the beginning of World War I, and tell me that it helped you understand things other than, oh my God, this is screwed up.
I failed before.
That's the level.
I would fail before I would even attempt that. Like,
no, it's actually very easy to read because you look at that and yep, this is a mess.
Yeah,
weird.
And you don't really need to know anything beyond that. You just need to know, my God, there's a lot of things that are going to create friction here. You know, I actually have my grandmother's geography book from she taught in 1918. It still has the Austro-Hungarian Empire in it. You know, and it's like,
wow.
I'm like, things have changed a bit. But you know what? If you do a linguistic map of Europe today, it's slightly clearer, but not a whole lot.
I would imagine it wouldn't have changed much, yeah?
No, I mean, forestry settlements after World War II. So, the German grouping is smaller, basically. But it's not hugely different, But that's, again, to get back to the point, that is where he's starting from. So the whole question of the realm of Gondor or something like that is a very amorphous thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned earlier. It's not like in Howard's Conan, where you're on the side of the border, you're one way. If you live on the other side of the border, you're a totally different person entirely. It's more of a pretty much what you get, for example, in border on country borders. Like, yeah, you speak German, you speak French. Doesn't make a difference.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because in Howard, the weird thing is, I believe if you go from, let's say, Zamora to Aquilonia, and one is a Provence analogy or analog, and one is an Italy, probably northern Italy analog, I believe they still speak the same language. So it's just a device. It's nothing more than a device. But that's not the way Tolkien's read.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see there's a burning Winnie the Pooh discussion going on in the chat.
Yes, obviously, yeah. Like, maybe we should discuss Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, possibly.
I think I have it in a copy of it in Latin somewhere.
Seriously?
Yeah. It's called Winnie le Pooh. I think I've got it somewhere. I can't read Latin, so it doesn't do me any good.
So, just as going back to the war stuff, have you seen a video on YouTube? And I reckon that you would probably find it really very interesting. It's, I think the title of, let me see if actually I can find a link. The War of the Ring. It's like 3 hours long, and this guy, like, there's animations, there's maps, and he's basically described every conflict in Middle Earth from the very beginning right through up until the end. Even the Daggerath or whatever it is. Let me see.
Sounds interesting. Can you throw me the link later?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That does sound good. I would certainly watch it.
I have to say, both times I've attempted to watch it, I have fallen asleep, but it is like 3 hours long.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's called War of the Ring, All Battles, Middle-earth History Lore Documentary. I'll send you a link, Karl.
Cool.
Sure thing. Okay, I'll post it in the comments later.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing to think about is that both we and Tolkien are projecting back onto these realms our understanding of politics and governmental structures, and basically what it seems to come down to is, if you think about it, there isn't any governmental structure in the Lord of the Rings.
True.
Yeah.
In the sense that I believe every single person who has power has absolute power. Or at least you're not told about any apparent limits. If you're Sauron, obviously you have limited power. And you're pretty happy about it. If you are the mayor of Mitchell Delving, you're not told that, you're not allowed to do certain things. what happens to being the mayor of Mitchell Delving when Sam, or it's not Sam, it's the Merry and Pippin get appointed Reeves of the Shire by Aragorn, or something like that.
Yep.
It's like, well, wait, are you impinging on somebody else's sovereignty? There's no discussions of this whatsoever. If you're King Theoden, you've got a slimy, the absolutely necessary slimy advisor, because you got to have somebody to make bad decisions on. But there's nobody else making decisions.
Yeah.
For the realm. So
Yeah, I didn't think
in some ways, it's very helpful to realize what it is that Tolkien is not interested in.
So at the same time, that might be one of the things that helps it be kind of timeless, because it's just giving you the posts, and then you can fill it in with whatever system you're familiar with whatever makes you comfortable thinking about.
Well, for me, like the longest time of my life, I can remember Lord of the Rings since my earliest memories, because like my dad was reading it to my older siblings, and while I was there, and then went on to reading it to me. It's always for me been just a really enjoyable, fascinating story that I love the emotions in it, and I love like a lot of the themes of like brotherhood and all of these. There's a lot of really nice, good themes in it. It's only now, much later on, as an adult, that I'm starting to really fully get interested and get dragged into a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, actually. And on that note, by no means at all am I it's not like I read loads of other books. Do you know what I mean? Like, for me, like, I'm not like an academic at all, really. But I'm trying to become more academical with this stuff because I just really want to understand it now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think on the other hand, I think you've read that particular book enough to make up for it.
Right. Well, it's an interesting thing in that I think Karl's absolutely right in that there are huge gaps that you can fill in. And I think that helps you if you want to fill them in, because it becomes a topic of discussion. Well, then what really did happen, but it also means that you don't have to worry about it if you're interested in it from a purely story point of view.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I'm now much more interested in more than the story. Like, I think it's probably going to take, I'm 40 now, so it's probably going to take the rest of my life to understand it. But like, I really want to delve in and get my head wrapped around the Silmarillion stuff. I'm gradually getting there. Like, mostly, like I've never actually managed to read the book, but I've listened to the audiobook of it. Like when I sat down to read the Silmarillion, it really frustrated the living daylights out of me.
Yeah, it's in very biblical language. It's very
and it's not what you're expecting.
Yeah,
you're expecting
that's one thing. Yeah.
Hobbit or Lord of the Rings.
And it's not a novel or a narrative. It's not meant to be read in that way.
And if I'd ever delved into that before Lord of the Rings, I don't think I would have ever engaged with the Lord of the Rings.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely not the right starting point.
That I think that's probably true of most people.
And I'm like very grateful for a lot of people who have done it and people who are very scholarly. And there's a lot of them like who do post great content out there that you can understand some of what's going on and then refer back to like, okay, when you're listening to the audiobook, okay, now I know. It's like the amount of times I've had to go, it's like, Ishtari, Iluvatar, like who's who and what's what, like,
Well, I tell you, it's an interesting thing in that to go back to the discussion that we had earlier about scripture, which is basically depending on which branch of Christianity you are a part of, there is a recognized version, right, of the scripture, and it might vary a bit, right? A few in, a few out. And then there are biblical scholars who spend their lives teasing out, okay, this particular codex says this, but this codex, which we think might be 12 years later, says this, right? I mean, it's really, really detailed. That does not impinge on the general readership at all. So I understand why Christopher Tolkien wrote, is it 10 or 12 volumes on how The Lord of the Rings was written? But I believe he did us all a vast disservice, because we don't have a received text now. Now we don't know what the quote truth is.
Yeah.
So I feel like it detracts. Like I read it I read The Lord of the Rings and maybe The Hobbit. I think I read The Lord of the Rings first in about 1968. And I remember going, wow, this is great. But I wasn't thinking about, hey, why is it becoming depopulated? I don't understand. It was just a great story. And the issue now is that in order to, quote, understand what's going on, you have to read a vast corpus of material. You have to read analysis, Tom Sheppy's books. I love reading them, but, at the end of the day, I end up arguing half the time, and that doesn't lead to more certainty. It leads to less, So the search for certainty, again, as in D&D, look, if you overcreate your world, you leave no room for anybody else to do anything. And unfortunately, I think it probably lost a bit of the wonder for me when I started getting into some of these. Well, why did he do this?
Is it the same? Is it the same as the Star Wars thing with the?
Yeah, don't even start.
Yeah, that stuff, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The midichlorians and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is, as well,
although actually, in a way, not that. Actually, Star Wars. Some of Star Wars was not that bad because like 99% of people say the midichlorians is just didn't ever happen.
The thing as well, like I don't know what you guys are like with a relationship with your father, but certainly with me, even though I like him well, our perspectives on things are extremely, extremely different. Like, so the idea that Christopher Tolkien being the best person to portray his work doesn't necessarily stand up, because I don't think I could represent my dad's ideas and views on the world the way he really thinks they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. I think you go either way. I mean, you could either say, no, I want an outsider who can look at this objectively and do it. Or you could say, no, I want somebody who talked to him personally about these. Is there a right way? Is there a wrong way? I don't know. All I know is I have 12 more really thick books to read.
Or you could just leave them and just enjoy
and not care. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
So
I did.
all
No,
this
that's
possibility.
pretty much what I did. I stopped. I read the Silmarillion. I read the Lost Tales. I read a bunch of stuff, and at some point I said, you know what, this is enough. I'm not getting anything else out of it. It's detracting from the experience.
Yeah.
But I do like to talk about things like, again, like technological stagnation and stuff like that, because that is in the book. It's not somebody else saying, I think this is what he meant. It's something that's in there, and maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong when we talk about it.
I'm trying to. Sorry for the interruption on my phone there. I'm redirecting this person gently.
Well, I have a friend who created a language.
Okay.
And he said it was one of the hardest things he's ever done. And I believe him. And the thought that someone, even a seasoned professional like Tolkien, would sit down and create this many languages at the same time that he was holding down a regular job, basically, to me is absolutely incredible. I like languages. I like the history of languages. I find it fascinating. But the thought that somebody could sit down and analyze this to the point that they could say, okay, now I'm now going to retro engineer something, an imaginary language, back 3,000 years.
So it's
and then
not...
I'm going to engineer it 2,000 years forward to the point at which the people who speak it rejoin the people that speak the original language.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wait, no, it's not the original language, because over the last 2,000 years, that is an amazing feat. And
So-
that's the background of these books.
See, the thing is, I think it is incredible, but without understanding it, because it's not as simple as basically changing the sounds for the words that we say.
Mm-hmm.
Which is where that's the only thing, the only concept of creating a language that I have, basically like Pig Latin or something like that. Like I don't understand how language is structured. Like I use grammar all of the time, well, kind of badly, but I don't understand how it's been structured. It just is. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that's most people's experience.
Mm.
And that's what's amazing is like I might be able to do it with one language, to do it with all of these, and then create a realistic timeline and background that actually holds them all. That's amazing.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean,
I did once actually in a job interview for a job that I knew I wasn't going to get. When they asked me, well, and how many other languages? What other languages do you speak? And I actually said Spanish, Sindarin, and Quenya. And they looked at me for a second and wrote it down. And,
okay, yeah, fair
I
enough.
didn't get the job, but I don't think it hurt me any.
Yeah, but going back to to what we were saying about being able to handle that many languages at that level, I think most of us can drive a car. A few people can repair a car, but very few people can design a car from the ground up.
Yeah, and then build it.
And then build it.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, I mean, again, this is what sets him apart, isn't it? We have good writers of fantasy. We have people like I almost always read Brandon Sanderson's new novel because I think he creates very good magic systems.
Yeah, there's his 2020 lectures on writing and world building on YouTube, which are fantastic. Literally everyone who likes fiction should watch those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean world building is an amazing thing, and here's a guy who, I don't know if you guys have you ever read any like E.R. Edison or anything like that?
I don't believe I have.
No.
Okay, so he was writing decades earlier, and he wrote. They're very hard to read, but the Warm Ouroboros, and the main characters are goblins, but they're sort of like Elizabethan goblins. It's hard to describe, and in the histories of fantasy, this is sometimes sort of said, oh, this is the background to Tolkien, and it's like this is nothing like it because there's no world, there's no depth.
Do you have the name of the specific story?
Yeah, I think he wrote a trilogy, and one of them is The Worm Ouroboros, Ourobos,
mm-hmm.
which is again the worm that eats its own tail.
Huh?
I feel like I've got something at the name of a story on the tip of my tongue, and I wonder if it is this writer.
Could be. And it's E.R. Edison, and Edison is spelled with 2 D's.
Something on the goblin.
Yeah, that rang a bell for some reason, but I can't remember
He's quite early, and I read it. I didn't think it was earth-shaking, but it was sort of okay. So this is one of the origins. But again, no matter how far back you go, and how far forward you go, you just don't find anything with this level of detail, of basic detail of just. Hi, there are 2 people here and they are talking to each other. And that is the basis of the Lord of the Rings. Everything else, building the map, building the governmental structures, all of that all rests on that.
No, I'm wrong. It's not him. It was The Princess and the Goblin.
I think I read that too.
George MacDonald.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
There's also a kind of a fun early Hobbit knockoff called the Gammage Cup.
Gammage Cup, all right?
Yeah, Gammage. The Gammage Cup, which is almost identical to the Hobbit.
Okay.
It can't be worse than the 1960s animated movie. Not the Rankin Bass one, the one that happened before it.
Yeah. I love Rankin Bass. They're so bad.
Yeah, but they're so
They're
bad. They're
so
good.
terrible to watch, and even my sons will mimic the way that the songs are sung. Really high voices, and they're quavering and all of that. It's very funny.
Okay.
You have any more questions or comments?
I don't
Steve,
at the moment.
I haven't really been paying attention to the chat. Like whenever it got into the whole Winnie the Pooh stuff, I was like, I can't. I had to stop reading the chat because then I was like listening to you talk and like Winnie the Pooh. I was just like getting confused. I was like, okay, don't look at the chat.
I wonder if Dundren Matron started that because one of our memorable Thanksgiving dinner conversations was a familial discussion of who killed Winnie the Pooh and who the most likely suspects were. The answer, by the way, is Kanga, because well, I won't even tell you why, but it's Kanga.
I hope they bring back Sean Bean for the Lord of the Rings too. That would be dope.
Dead. He has to die. Dies in everything.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's kind of a habit of his.
Yeah, I think it's in every contract.
Okay. Back in a second because I think I've had some problems with my camera.
No worries. Just another one there from Sean Rader. Are you seeing the chat as well here, Tom? Yeah.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so Sean's saying, when you look at it all, Tolkien suffered from shell shock or PTSD today. All his writing, he is expressing what he saw during World War I. Look at military maps from 1914 to 1919.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that was a seminal. Well, big surprise, right? Being in the trenches during the Battle of the Somme, if it isn't a seminal event in your life, there's something wrong with you. You probably died it. So, you know, he didn't go in until 1916, so he wasn't there at the beginning. But you know, he's like every Englishman of that generation, his friends died, people died around him. You know, you don't walk away from that unscathed. You know, whenever I see something set in Edwardian England, I inevitably think half of these young men are going to be dead in the next.
Yeah, that's not an inaccurate assessment.
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's one thing to watch a movie about the war, you're expecting people to die. It's another thing to be watching a P.G. Wodehouse adaptation and know that these people are going to die.
Can I just share something funny with you guys? Even though it's a bit of a segue, my friend was trying to get hold of me there, and I texted him back, sorry, man, I'm on a live stream, can't chat. And he sent me a photograph. This is me on a live stream. It's a photograph of him fishing in the street. I'm getting trolled. I'm getting trolled.
Is that a ring I see in the river at his feet?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
And I've just totally messed up my camera. Not that I need to be in focus, really.
Well, here's a discussion point, because there's no wrong here. So we get to the end of the Lord of the Rings. Gondor is triumphant, I guess you would have to say, and you know, Rohan continues to exist clearly, and there's the implication that there is new settlement that's occurring. The Shire is extended. Mostly, what that tells me is that the hobbits are fertile little devils. But and in fact, how many kids do Sam and Rosie have? It's like 12 or something.
Something like that, yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. Oh boy. If just his family members vote for him, he'll be mayor of Mitchell Delvin.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's sort of like, okay, but then what happens? Aragorn rules for however many years it is. You know the name of his son, but you know what? This idea of the golden age, you can only have a golden age if it's followed by disaster. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a golden age.
Mm.
So this is now the age of man, right? That's the whole point. It's now the age of man. The choice was between the age of the orc, supposedly, although what that would have been like, we'll never know. And the age of man. What does that actually mean? Because there's huge numbers of. I mean, we are told that the elves gradually leave, right? But there's a lot of dwarves, and in fact, they are recolonizing former strongholds as well. So, what actually is going to happen?
Well,
Because it can't all be ruled from Minas Tirith.
in my mind, and I could be just completely wrong here. This is just I've always felt that there was, even though they come out victorious and they win, they've almost gone past a point of saving stuff. So basically, the Shire is never the same again. These people, like, nothing in this world is like they haven't got rid of the bad guy, and now we can all go back to the nice things that were happening. It's basically, we got rid of the bad guy, and now we're trying to pull the pieces, and a lot of that influence is messed up the decisions from that point onwards. It's they're basically delaying the slow decline of society to possibly ultimate destruction anyway. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Lisa.
Yeah, I think Lisa wants to answer her question, yeah.
I want to know what Black Speech is based on. Bye.
Speech is based on.
I don't know.
I think this is one for Tom.
I have no idea what Black Speech. Other than liking the sound of it, I have no idea.
I don't think we've been given
by the sounds of it, it's based on. By the sound of it, it's based on Klingon.
I would not.
Do you ever get what it's?
Maybe
where
Klingon is based on it.
Do you actually get words in it in the book? I know there's a little bit in the movie, but
yeah, Ashnur's Dubotalik, Ashnaz Kripat. No, Ashnaz Dubotalik, Ashnaz
Batimbru,
Ashnaz Gimbatul.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, you guys actually remember that.
I'm afraid that if I read the inscription on the ring, I'll invoke it or something. I don't know what it's based on. I don't know what it's based on. Lots of Z's and G's, basically. I will tell you that if you spell it out normally, it looks not completely unlike Turkish, but I have no idea. But
interesting.
I don't know. Your point, Michael, about the long, slow decline and you can't go back. I know that when the Lord of the Rings came out in the 50s originally, and people, understandably, 10 years after the end of World War II, they said to Tolkien, "Oh, is this about World War II, the great evil?" And this is because it's easy, right? Nazis are a universal villain. And he said, "No, it's not. It's not about World War II." And of course, to get back to what Sean said, it wasn't World War II that he was fighting in. He wasn't watching people die and standing up to his waist in mud in World War II, right? And it makes me wonder if he, either consciously or subconsciously, was basically admitting exactly what you said, or acknowledging what you said, which is you cannot go back. Once you've been in a transformative event like this, whether at a personal level or at a social level or a societal level, you cannot go back. So all those, the visions that Frodo has of the way that the Shire looks,
Mm-hmm.
In the worst case scenario, is Tolkien saying, look, I understand, he grew up outside of Birmingham, right?
Mm-hmm.
I understand that growth of the industrial city and of the industrial society, it will happen. And in some ways, this great struggle that we are celebrating as a triumph will actually accelerate that process. So that in that sense, Lord of the Rings, rather than your simple high fantasy, triumphal quest kind of thing,
Happily
really
and
becomes
stuff, yeah.
a social trend.
It's like, so post-war, obviously, like I mean, I have often wondered what would it have been like to live in the time just after World War II, even.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard my stories from my grandparents, and even my dad, about when he was a child and the way the world was and the restructuring, like all of that industrialization that was designed initially to go towards military means, and kind of basically they just kind of turned it to, like, I mean, the boom in technology from that point was so unbelievably fast. Does that make sense?
Well, I think the problem that the British had after World War II is that they had won the war, but they had completely burned out their industrial processes in so doing.
Right.
I mean, this is a huge problem, is that, the German and Japanese economies were flattened. They were at zero. So they had to be rebuilt. And when they were rebuilt with modern things. To a large degree, the United Kingdom fought the Second World War on Victorian machinery.
Yeah.
And it burned out. And there was nothing left to take its place. Which is one of the reasons why rationing kept going for a decade after the war.
But I guess what was there, and what actually still remains, was all of the factories that came up during that period of time of industrialization, places for people to work, like getting into car manufacturing, Ford, this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these factories were repurposed.
I mean, I think the problem that you have then, I mean, I don't know that we want to get into a discussion of post-war economic policy, but basically what it comes down to is the United States gave the UK a lot of money and stuff during the war, and after the war, they didn't give it to them anymore. They gave it to the French, or not to the French. They gave it to the Germans and to the Japanese.
Right.
And, so now, arguably speaking, the UK was in a worse economic position than it had been before the war.
Quite possibly. I mean, I wouldn't know, but I just have always, like, it basically, where humans are, where people exist, ultimately it's like the Roman Empire falling or something like that. It's ultimately going to collapse, and like, I actually believe that about the society we live in.
Well,
It might not happen in our lifetime or in our children's lifetime, but ultimately it's going.
yeah, so far we don't have a great track record with societies lasting for more than 500 years, maybe something like that, on a good day.
Yeah, I mean, there are outliers, right? But yeah, 500 years is about as long as you're going to,
Very optimistic, yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of it interests me that, yeah, here's a golden age, and the king has returned, blah blah blah. Okay, but what does that really mean? Because how long is that going? It can't stay the golden age forever. And I think two things. One is Tolkien's not interested in that. If he because it has nothing to do with his languages. He doesn't care. The king's back. That's good enough. It served its purpose as a vehicle. Okay, And the other part of it is, I think he probably realized, as someone who had fought in the First World War and had made it through the Second World War, is like, look, let's not get too optimistic here. It's not, we thought it was going to be better in 1918, you know, the war to end all wars, right? Hey, guess what? We just had a bigger. I hope the next one isn't any bigger. You know? So it's kind of an interesting thing to me. It's a false triumphal note, and I think in that sense, the last real shot of the films, where it shows him, you know, lying on his tomb, and you know, clearly it's winter, or at least fall, and
That's symbolic.
It's not just symbolic, it's almost specific. You know, it's not just winter, it's the fact that you see the leaves fall. And it's the fact that he's being watched over by someone who, she may have chosen mortality. She represents history because she had the choice to be immortal. But she's watching him die. You'll notice that there's no, you know, happy son Eldarian running around going, "That's okay, I'm king now, everything's still going to be fine." So I think it's sort of a, I got to stop this now. I'm done with this, and this is the answer. This is the way all quest literature ends. You know, and he was intimately familiar with that.
He did start another book after, and then decided not to finish it.
Right. No, yeah.
Curious to see about that.
What was it about?
I think I've seen bits of it.
Right.
And or maybe it was just like his reaction to it. And he said he started to write it and it just didn't feel right. You know, it's something like that. It was a generic response.
It's like, do you create a new Dark Lord, and like where's the threat, and like, or because I mean, yeah,
I think I have read excerpts from it, and it ended up sounding exactly the same again, because, you know, as you think about all the different cultures that he was an expert in, linguistically and literature speaking, they're all the same. You know, I mean, if you just change the names, you know, you can find the same story in an awful lot of different cultures. So I think, if I remember correctly, what I was reading was it was sort of like, well, it's uninspired because you got nothing new to say because you did it all. And I think he realized that, and you know, was sort of like, nope, I'm done. It's not like he has a shortage of things to work on, for God's sakes.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I think it's actually in some ways far more interesting once you've got a book like The Lord of the Rings. It's far more interesting to write back lore.
Or just do something else entirely like he did, because there is a point where it gets too much.
Yeah.
You know, I'm reminded of Isaac Asimov's attempt to link up all of his sci-fi series towards the end of his life, and it ended up just kind of feeling forced. Like, you were happy to see some of these characters again, and you're like, oh wait, it's, you know, I don't want to draw a really strong Star Wars thing, but you know, when you know what happens in the middle trilogy, the first trilogy is not going to be that exciting because you know where it has to go. But one of the things that he had done, of course, was he had said, oh, this goes on for thousands of years. Well, there's lots of stories in 1,000 years.
Oh, good. Yeah, now the chat is going on about a Lord of the Rings sequel in space. Okay.
Yeah. That's the only inevitable place that it could go.
Yeah,
really.
And it'll involve lightsabers.
Okay. Yeah, about the discovering of the Shire thing, I always thought of it as something like, look, if you're going to go out to do something, even if it's something right, and even if you succeed, things are going to be moving on without you anyway. So you don't expect to see the same thing you left.
Yeah, yeah. It isn't like it was in stasis while you were gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
mean,
one, and let's see what else.
Well, and again,
which
if you served in the war, served in any war, and you come home, things are different.
what was there a comment related to the scourging of the Shire?
No, just going back to what we were talking about earlier. Just I was following the chat, and I kind of lost track of the conversation for a second.
Okay, so I don't know if I've gone off down the wrong rabbit hole here in my thinking. The scourging of the Shire, like I've often sort of heard people feeling like that it's like a bit of a tag on. Like
I don't think so. I think it's a very important part of the story, in my opinion. In fact,
I
I
do.
was very surprised that it was not in the it was left out of the movies.
See, I agree with you. Like I think that the scourging of the Shire presented an opportunity to see how hobbits had developed past the point of uh, basically being destructible to a certain degree, like that they through the whole thing and their journey,
How they grew up, kind of thing.
they grew up, they became uh bigger. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like
They went
Well, I think,
from being passive to active, kind.
and also from being isolated, because
yeah,
at the
Very good.
beginning of
That's a
the
very good
books,
point. Yeah.
they're isolated, but that's not true anymore. You can't hide. The world is here, and
yeah.
I think that's a very personal statement by him. I mean, the whole thing is a personal statement, but
Also, I wonder if it's just like maybe just a little bit too, it would have been a little bit too nice had they all gone off and then like the Shire just was this
yeah,
unharmed little corner and pocket, and then they all lived happily ever in the Shire.
yeah, yeah.
You know,
And again, to go back to something I was talking about earlier, the fact is that you know the king appoints. For all that the Shire was essentially autonomous, right? It governed itself, but suddenly now that Merry and Pippin, who by the way are now almost as tall as men, they're not hardly even hobbits anymore. Now they come back with the favor of the king, and the king is appointing people in the Shire. You know, game changer. It's not the Shire that your parents knew.
but I wonder if that's because the hobbits voluntarily became subservient.
I think no. I think it was always the case because you even have stuff like the King's Road and things like that. I think it's mentioned in The Hobbit, not The Lord of the Rings. So it was always part of that kingdom. It's just that they hadn't had a king for a very long time.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. It was in concept they were part of the kingdom, but it was sort of like they don't know the name of the king. Of course, there is no king by this time, right? There's just at the beginning of the book. There's no king.
I mean,
Um,
again, if you go back to, for example, the way that the Roman Empire collapsed,
Mhm.
yeah, or even less dramatically, anytime there was a change of emperor, people in the provinces probably wouldn't know for 4 to 5 years. They're
Mhm.
still paying taxes anyway. They're still getting service anyway. Just it's a different emperor. When the Roman Empire collapsed, I think it took about a few decades for where to get around.
Well, if you look at, for example, when Attila the Hun invaded what would become, he invaded Gaul. We'll put it that way. When he invaded Gaul in 451, 452, something whatever, the army that defeats him at the Battle of the Catalonian Fields is led by a Roman who says he's a consul, although he probably doesn't know who the emperor is, because we're getting pretty close to the end of the Western Roman Empire. Most of his army is actually Germanic,
Yeah, of course.
who clearly don't know what the name of the emperor is. but the idea is, well, no, if we say we work for the emperor, we work for the emperor, but we're not paying any taxes or anything, and we're not following his orders.
Details.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems like it's kind of that way. Oh yeah, sure, the king, great. Yeah, we're as long as he doesn't tell us what to do, we're fine with him. You know? But that changes. That clearly changes. Gondor is reaching out at the end of the books to exert control over these territories that used to be, fringes that were falling away. So, maybe it isn't as horrific as, as Frodo's dreams are, these sort of dark satanic mills that have taken over.
Yeah, and I always thought it
Maybe
was some
it's more
kind of like an
insidious.
extreme case kind of thing.
Yeah. So hard to know. Again, how much of this is his intent and how much of this is, just coming out.
Yeah. Are either of you reading it at the minute? Are either
I
of
am
you?
not.
I am in the middle. I'm just leaving Bree at the minute.
At the moment I'm reading Disunited Nations, so it's a bit of a different read.
I'm reading Douglas Porter's The Conquest of Morocco, so it's again a little different.
Oh, nice.
And Bree is one of those Neverworlds, right? What's up with Bree?
What do you mean by Neverworld?
Well, where the Shire, the people in the Shire, at least sort of say things about the king. Do they even refer to the king or to the steward or anything like that in Bree? It's like they've gone totally rogue.
I see.
In
Right.
Bree seems to me like the closest thing to a city or a large town in that part of area, which is more cosmopolitan, more like a melting pot of cultures. Because you walk into the tavern and like it's men and hobbits all sitting together. It's whereas the Shire is very much
Just
the
hobbits.
hobbits, and like the only people that are ever really out of the ordinary there are coming to Bag End. It's like dwarves or Gandalf.
Specifically to talk to Bilbo because he's weird, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
Bree seems to be like, on the skirts between man country and hobbit country, and it's kind of like they all mix together, and they're probably starting to share each other's cultures a little bit.
Possibly, yeah.
It has always seemed to me to be almost like a Wild West town.
That's kind of the feeling I get as well. I agree.
It's on the edge. It's a little weird because you have things on both sides, right? But it's kind of out there on the edge, and there's all these references to. Basically, I think there's a reference to what you might refer to as a Hobbit ghetto. I think there's a reference to like the Hobbit house or the Halfling houses all being in like on one side of the hill or something like that.
I don't know. I never thought of that as a ghetto because hobbits have to have smaller houses anyway.
Well, that's very true. I mean, there are physical constraints,
But
at least they were all living together. I mean, they're
in the same area, yeah.
Separate. Yeah.
That's actually something now we're talking about it. That's actually something that they might have done badly in the movie is the representation of Bree. Now that I think of it, because I've literally just had the Nazgul are in.
Yeah, they're in the tavern, yeah.
Yeah. The description of the tavern and the description of what's going on inside the tavern, and in the film there are no other hobbits other than Frodo, Sam, and it's just
but in the book there's lots of them.
Oh yeah,
loads of them just sitting around chatting away like.
Okay, right now I'm trying to imagine a hobbit trying to get into a human-sized bed. It's like, innkeeper, fetch me the stepladder.
Stand on my shoulders.
Can you imagine all of these little hobbits trying to get into this bar and the barman constantly saying, "Show me your ID, please."
Yeah. And would you like a half pint? No, I don't mean you.
Instead of showing them their ID, they basically lift their feet just to show their hairy feet.
That's right.
I'm not a child.
Well, now this gets to a very important thing. What is the drinking age for halflings?
Huh.
I'd imagine quite young. I would say
Uh,
it's. I mean, not
They
dissimilar.
don't. Well, look, they don't reach their majority until they're 100. Is it 111?
33, 33.
30. I'm sorry, 33.
111 is
So,
when you're
111
vulnerable.
was just Bilbo's birthday. 11.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sorry. But yeah, 33. So if 33 for them equals, we'll say 21 just to be
Yeah,
safe.
on the safe
Right?
side.
So it's,
But it depends. I mean, like I think the French and Southern Europeans and stuff like that,
I was literally going to say that, Karl.
giving a child some wine at age 6 or something is no big deal. Someone
Yeah.
with the meal or something. So
Yeah, exactly.
you're not going to serve
The
them
thing
in a
is
bar,
that-
but definitely, yeah.
the other thing that would depend on is how safe the water is to drink.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yep,
but
that's
Okay.
by all accounts, it's very safe in the Shire, but I don't know about anywhere else.
Well, I'm
But-
just thinking about like in any town, how safe is the water?
Well, I
You
mean,
know,
look, that was.
I don't see any evidence of like major sewer construction. It seems to me you're going to have to be careful.
Well, I think that like what Karl's saying to me feels more. Well, I mean, I understand the thing about the is the water clean, because I know that like back in medieval times they were drinking a lot of alcohol mostly because it was safer than drinking the water.
Right.
But the whole thing about the culture of drinking for the young, and not to the extent of serious alcoholism, because it's an accepted part of culture that we have a little bit of a drink. Like the hobbits don't strike me as people who have like serious alcoholic tendencies, but they do like to have a good old drink, like and it's all in a very nice way. I can't like you can't imagine hobbits going home and like drunkenly getting into domestics.
Yeah, they.
I think it depends on like on which bar they go to.
Yeah, but
Like if they happen to be West Ham United fans and they go to the wrong pub, that could be a problem.
Yeah, I guess what you mean. Still, I like the idea of, like you mentioned, of Brie as a frontier town, as a western town, because it's like
it's on the edge. I mean, there's
It's
whether
a-
it has two edges or not, it's kind of immaterial.
yeah,
It's-
but the thing is that it's like when you say a frontier town, usually it's like civilization,
Mhm.
nothingness, and you're there in
Yeah.
between. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for Brie, it's
I
like
mean, I think there are references to like farms and things like that around Brie, but it's the only town.
yeah. But on the other hand, from the point of view of a hobbit, it's like okay, you've got the Shire, which is
Yeah.
where all civilized people live.
Right. Right.
Brie, and the rest of it is all savages and wild people and strange creatures and stuff like that.
No, that's very true. I mean,
You could literally have another city out there.
The only weird people in the Shire go to Bag End, right? But if you want to see weird people, you don't go to Bag End. You go to Brie and you see all of that, right? That is a big excursion to go to Brie. And why would you do it?
You would have to be a very weird person yourself.
I guess so. But
yeah, you have to cross through the Barrow Downs and
I mean, it's dangerous. It's an adventure holiday.
Sucked into the ground by trees.
Yeah, kidnapped by dead people and yeah.
Eat dinner with Tom Bombadil.
Well, that'd be okay. But you have to sign up for that separately and pay more.
Yeah,
that is like the whole thing with Tom Bombadil. That is a really interesting little excursion into there that seems to be something that should be way more important, and then just kind of fades out and disappears off. And
yeah, it's like it doesn't really fit into the whole hero's journey kind of thing, because you're going from starting off, meet someone who is practically on the same level as a I don't know, the
demigod,
demigod level kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he's never mentioned again.
Yeah, but to me, in some ways, it kind of feels like I don't know how Tolkien wrote. I know that some writers know where they're going to end up before they start writing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I wonder if maybe Tolkien didn't, but just started writing, because I know that like there's that whole idea that like in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, and it just came to him, and then maybe he just started writing from there. But then by the time he gets to Tom Bombadil and coming out to Bree, then maybe he's starting to go, right, okay, now I'm constructing it in my head. Yeah, this is probably not where I want to go. Let's go this way. And then he got his direction. And from there, it becomes much more
It's
clearly path in my mind.
It's perfectly possible that he just never bothered to remove it in later editions, revisions.
But to be honest, like I mean, don't get me wrong, I love the whole Tom Bombadil thing, and I love the Barrow Downs.
That's what I mean about didn't bother to remove it. Like it obviously doesn't fit, but it doesn't detract from the story. Because otherwise, or unless he had some other point for it, which we still have no idea about, I believe he would have removed it.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember is he's not publishing it. His editor said it was okay. You know, it does. It reads like he was sort of writing and said, "Ooh, this is cool," and then and then like got caught up and like, "Oh, now I've got to do what happens at the Prancing Pony," and then and like forgot about it, and then went back and like,
the publisher was like,
"Remember what I was going to do with this?"
And the publisher was go like this, so yeah.
Yeah, and the publisher is like, "Look, we're just going to set the type and leave it alone. It's fine, you know."
Stop revising the document. It doesn't
contribute much to the narrative, but it doesn't detract from it. So let's just let sleeping demigods be. He's a very fascinating character, and I think maybe one of the problems is, and I've seen some debate about this, is just like so earlier in the Silmarillion stuff. There are these statements like during the initial war against Melkor that it takes a Maiar to go up against one.
Yep.
Right. And even in the Lord of the Rings, the statement is made that it would take Sauron himself to break the protection that Galadriel gave her for it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I wonder if the problem with Tom Bombadil is that he is too powerful.
Yeah, because like I mean, the explanation of why he didn't take the ring or wouldn't get involved is so kind of disappointing to me. It's just like, oh, he's not concerned with these matters. I'm just like, what? That's not good enough an explanation. Come on.
Well, and it also doesn't make sense because it's not just that he's not concerned with it. He is concerned with it because he is so freaking powerful that he can just juggle the ring around. He doesn't care.
And we'll probably forget about it and lose it somewhere.
Yeah. So now you have a guy who apparently is more powerful than Sauron. But if you have him in the story, why doesn't everybody just go to Tom Bombadil and go, "Oh, please help us"? Tom seems like a decent guy. Maybe he'll just walk out and go bing to Sauron, and that cuts the whole thing short. And it's too bad because I love him. He's a great character.
He is a great character, but I've always wondered then, is he actually an incarnate version of Iluvatar?
I don't think so. I think there was some note in the Unfinished Tales, I think, but that was not the intention. No.
Yeah, I don't think there's any. I don't think I've read anything that made me think that Iluvatar came into the world.
No, there isn't, but I mean, it's a speculative thing. It's not. There's no evidence. I'm not putting any evidence on that, but it's a lot of when Tolkien's writing about wizards, for instance, they're the Ishtari. There are 5 of them. It's all very clear, like who's who and what they are. Whereas Tom Bombadil,
not clear what he is.
not clear what he is at all. He's not an Ishtari. He's not one of the Blue Wizards.
Yeah.
So
he's not a Maiar.
He's not a Maiar.
Yeah.
So what is he like? That's where
well, there's only one thing left, right? Which is Valar.
Well,
which
on the other hand, he does mention a lot of unspoken things and things that no one knows about, hidden creatures and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the whole point was that it was a mystery. It might be related to something that already was already shown to exist, but might even just be something totally else entirely. I
don't know.
I think it was intentionally kept open.
Yeah, and the other thing I think is because Tolkien is not particularly interested in being a novelist, I think he's more open to leaving things open.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't feel like he has to tie it all up. Yeah.
I wonder if it's possible that he is just a man, and that, but he is a man that is unspoilt by.
Again, it could be anything. Could be literally anything.
Yeah, so he's like a natural man, right?
Yeah, but just so unbelievably good and uncorruptible that it almost becomes like magic.
Mm-hmm. Don't know.
Anyway,
I just don't think we're given enough to really get a feel for it. Yeah, I mean, his wife Goldberry is the
hello, guys.
You can't find the cat at the beginning of this, and then now you can't get rid of the cat.
I told you he would come up out at the most inopportune moment.
I'm disappointed. Biscuit's not here to say hello. Where are you? Come here.
His wife is, it says, I think, the daughter of the river god, and the river god is in fact a Valar.
Good point. Yeah.
So I don't know exactly how Valar family dynamics work, but if you're a Valar and your father-in-law is a Valar, I wouldn't mess with you.
Yeah, definitely.
So, what do you want?
Okay. What's your cat called?
Okay, you're not going to believe this, but then again, you probably will. His name is Gygax.
That's what the comments about Gygax are. I was like, huh? Confused here.
Yeah, that's Gygax. What do you want, buddy?
Okay, guys, it's coming up to midnight here, so close to midnight, so we're going to wrap up very soon.
Cool, man. No problem.
Any more ideas or points you would like to throw out before we leave?
I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was fun. And I'm going to pick on Harry Potter again, which is it's a perfect example of giving too many details. Because if they don't all work together, somebody notices and broadcasts it.
I get you.
And to get back to where Karl and I actually started, which was about the technological problem, is like, look, when you're dealing with high fantasy, which is Tolkien, the magic is either sort of innate in the land or only exists in a few very, very, very powerful people. Nobody is going around doing, practical jokes with magic.
Mm.
But when you get to Harry Potter and it's essentially low fantasy, everybody can do magic. But if that's true, and believe it or not, this was the big discussion in the household last night. If you're in the burrow, how do the toilets work? Because we know there's a bathroom. We know there's a bathroom.
I hope so, yeah.
But how does it work? So does magic take the place of technology? And it kind of does, right? Because they're not texting people, they're sending owls, right?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then when you look at Tolkien, you get to the point where magic is so rare, or it's of a type that is so different, it cannot take the place of technology.
Yeah.
But to my mind, what that would mean is then you develop the technology because there's no alternative.
Yeah.
But that did not happen.
So, I mean, not as big a fan of the Hobbit movies, and I'm pretty certain this isn't canonical in any way, but it is an example of how magic doesn't exist in Tolkien in the same way. Is whenever they're walking out of the Shire with the dwarves, and one of the dwarves asks Bilbo to make it, or asks Gandalf, "Can't you make this deluge? Can't you do something about this deluge?" And he says, "It's raining. It'll stop raining when it stops," kind of thing. It's just like, that's not magic. Whereas if it was Harry Potter, they would go bibbity bobbity boo.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would stop.
Now, but what's even funnier about that, and this is how things change, is that if you play video games based on The Lord of the Rings, you have exactly those kinds of spells. You have Harry Potter spells. Okay. Now,
yep.
What at the crossing, is it the crossing of Bruinen, where they're trying to escape after Weathertop?
Yep.
And Glorfindel brings down whatever he does. He brings the river up to flood stage and it washes away people.
Mm-hmm.
It at least seems like it might be a spell. Maybe.
Or he just does it very nicely.
Yeah. You know, it's hard to tell. But again, it comes down to, I don't think Tolkien's particularly concerned about that.
Yeah.
You know, the magic seems to be something that inhabits things. Not something that does things.
Yeah.
Just coming up on that sort of coming out of Bree, I'm moving into that now. So I'll be thinking about that actually whenever I read that now.
Cool.
That's cool.
All right. Are we good?
I believe so.
Yeah. Good for me. I enjoyed that very, very much.
Yeah, so did I.
Yeah, it's fun.
So, Tom, thank you very much. This was super interesting, and I hope we can have you back and talk more history at a later point.
Hey, anytime I can do the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of the Catalonian Fields, that's...
Catalonian Fields. Yeah, so we'll definitely have you back for that one.
All right, great.
Mike, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again on the 5th of February for the Dangerous Cutter Time stream.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay.
Alrighty. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. You have a great day or night, and we'll see you next Sunday with Scatter Terrain. Okay? Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.